And I'm at that hour. So, hello to anyone who is there, which today I do know means one person. There. Oh, hello, Nazca. 2 people today. Whoa. Getting in early. Right. But yeah. So, hello to the people. As always, my name is SkitterSkreetch. Well, I guess I can't say that now, because there have been a few occasions where it has not been me. So I guess as usual, it's me, SkitterSkreetch. That's a troubling implication there. I hadn't thought of that. Well, anyway, this time it is me, SkitterSkreetch. And as always, I'll be able to read a book. Lamp, after what happened last stream, Lamp has said he's not as dead set on me doing the old vamping thing for as long. He said it's fine for me to only go 5 minutes rather than 10 minutes to talk to people before stream. And he said it in that way where, like, you know, someone says something's fine, but you know they don't mean that it's fine, but he did say it, so we'll take advantage. But yeah, so today we're going to be reading, where is it? Oh, right, yeah. Going to be reading The Pearl by John Steinbeck, which, what do you call it? Last time I read one of his, it almost drove me to tears because of how sad it was. So, you know, that's something to look forward to. And I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to handle this thing, but the current plan is not to talk about it. So I think I'm going to do that. Ooh, this is wrong. Yeah, well, current plan is to not talk about it. So, yeah. What else? Man, it's hard to vamp for like a few minutes. I guess I should tell you about what I've been doing the last couple of days. So, like I said on the Bird website yesterday, I was busy retooling all the wards. You might be able to, Lamp tells me that can affect the acoustics actually, so if you hear anything weird, I mean, let me know if it's a problem, but that might be why. It changes how things sound around here, so, yeah.
Right.
Hello, Abbe. Wow, 3 people. Ooh. Some sort of record here. Yeah, so I spent yesterday tooling around with the wards. It's sort of a nightmare. There's like an epoxy that I have to use, and then you've got to use. There's like a bucket of like powdered metals. It's like some combination of silver and mithril, not mithril. What's the one? The one what sets for magnesium. That's it. Some mixture of silver and magnesium that I mix into a thing or the suspension. Yeah, it's been all right today. I did briefly get stuck on a saddle, as I alluded to on Twitter, but I got off all right. It's fun. But yeah, so I spent all day yesterday doing that, and I was very sticky. I hate working with epoxy. Like, humans have it easy. You guys have like hands and arms and stuff that keep stuff away from you. If you're a rat and you're working with something sticky, you just get covered in it. But yeah, and then you have to, like, because of what it is, you have to wait for it to hard, and then you have to shower it, and you have to get it. Whole process. So that was my whole day yesterday. But I did spot, which got the Pearl over while I was out. I was hoping there would be a section with some more Steinbeck in it, but it just seemed to be like a loose book someone had had at some point and stuff somewhere. Still, we're happy to have it. And then today I did a bit more going around. Lamp figured out what was up with the one thing. So you might be able to see down there, like underneath me now, the tractor's middle one that the other fellow read. There's some sort of weird R that appears to have opened on it, and apparently that was some sort of sign that it shouldn't have been in the section it was in, because it was like there was energy bound up in it and it used, I don't know. But Lamp has put a couple of his custom nails in either side to keep that in track. And I did go back there to find that out, and we found a couple more books, and one of them is also the same, but Lamp's put a nail in that one ahead of time, so that shouldn't be a problem next time. But yeah, so I don't know what's happening with that. But it's fine. Lamp says as long as there's at least one chain on the book, it should be a fine thing. It shouldn't be a problem. And I have no choice but to believe him, because he will not teach me anything about magic. So that's where we are. That's how we stand. I don't know what's happening. Yeah. Did I do anything else tonight today? Well, I got stuck on a cursed saddle, like I mentioned. I don't know what, like, so the library is just full of like old cursed stuff. Most of it's books, but there's like stuff in here that, like, you know, the wizards didn't want to get out, and they just sort of cluttered it everywhere. So, you know, you go into a room and there's half a dozen things, and you know, sometimes you have to climb over stuff. I'm pretty good at spotting when something's cursed usually, because you get used to it. But it was just like, I thought it was just like some leather. Like there's some levers and like there's bookbinding supplies down here, and I was like, yeah, it's just some leather. And I climb onto it and I can't get my feet off, and it's a saddle. Oh Lord, everyone's going out tonight. If only, but I do wish this last one hadn't. Right, down here. There we are. Yeah, so I thought it was some old leather. Climb onto it. I can't get my foot off, and it turns out it's a saddle that is cursed to make it so you can't get out of the saddle, which was fun. But yeah, eventually it's like a lot of these have like command words to undo their thing, and there's like a set of stock ones you just run through. It's sort of like password guessing, but you know, you have to do it in Latin. Which, yeah. Anyway, is it 5 past the hour? Yeah, it's 5 past the hour, so I can stop doing my little spiel thing and go over to the actual book. So, oh, you can't avoid getting cursed down here in Nazca. This place is full of curses. You just got to get good at, like, you know, undoing them. I shouldn't be able to get possessed. Apparently, Lamp says that the alignment that was, well, I thought it was a cosmic alignment. Apparently, it was just a date because it was the 6th of the 6th of the 26th, and apparently that was like, you know, 666 and the 626. There's like a whole thing where that was enough for whatever it is. I don't understand. Lamp will yell. The thing about this is, Lamp yells details at me of what happens, and then I have to sort of put it together from there because he won't teach me magic. So all I'm working with is like scraps of stuff that he's yelled at me. But yeah, but there's all sorts of cursed items down here. You get cursed. Yeah, but actually, let me turn around here real quick. Did I ever show you this little scar here? The one on my right side. I don't normally show this side of the camera because it's a bit more scratched up than the other side. I try to give you my best face. But this scar here, the one in the middle, where there's no fur, that's from where I grew an extra arm. Just grew right on out of me. Had to get that cut off. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. This place is bad. The fact that I am still alive, miracle. But you get used to it. One day I'll get out of here. I've got to keep telling myself that. But yeah. What will I do? Oh yeah. Write books. That's the thing that I do. That's my profession. So yeah, today we got The Pearl by Steinbeck. This one's sort of a middling, like it's not a short story, or it's not like a short, I don't know. It's like 80 pages, I think, so it's probably a couple hours of reading. We'll see how we got on. But yeah, as always, if anyone misses something that needs me to go back over it, or wants me to, you know, comment on something, I'll have to go back and repeat stuff. If you have something to say, feel free to say it. I'm always happy to chat. This one looks like it's broken down the chapters, so we'll probably do the little pause after each chapter for me to take a drink. And I guess since I've been doing my waffle, I have a drink before we start, just as best practice. And yeah. But other than that, unless anyone has anything they want to say to me before we start, and without any further ado, I shall begin. The Pearl. In the town, they tell the story of the Great Pearl, how it were found and how it were lost again. They tell of Kino, the fisherman, and of his wife Ioana, and the baby Coyotito. And because the story has been told so often, it has taken root in every man's mind. And, as are all retold tales that are in people's hearts, there are only good and bad things, and black and white things, and good and evil things, and no in between anywhere. If this story is a parable, perhaps everyone takes his own meaning from it, and reads his own life into it. In any case, they say in that town that, chapter 1, Kino awakened in the near dark. The stars still shone, and the day had drawn on only a pale wash of light on the lower sky to the east. The roosters had been crowing for some time, and the early pigs were already beginning their ceaseless turning of twigs and bits of woods to see whether anything to eat had been overlooked. Outside the brush house, in the tuna clump, a covey of little birds chattered and fluttered with their wings. Kino's eyes opened, and he looked first at the lightning square, which was the door, and then he looked at the hanging box where Coyotito slept. And last he turned his head to Ioana, his wife, who lay beside him on the mat, a blue-edged shawl over her nose and over her breasts and around the small of her back. Ioana's eyes were open too. Kino could never remember seeing them closed when he awakened. Her dark eyes made little reflected stars. She were looking at him, as she were always looking at him when he awakened. Kino heard the little splash of morning waves on the beach. It were very good. Kino closed his eyes again and listened to his music. Perhaps he alone did this, and perhaps all of his people did it. His people had once been great makers of songs, so that everything they saw, or thought, or did, or heard become a song. That was very long ago. The songs remained. Kino knew them, but no new songs were added. That does not mean that there were no personal songs. In Kino's head there were a song now, clear and soft, and if he'd been able to speak of it, he would have called it the song of the family. His blanket were over his nose to protect him from the dank air. His eyes flicked to a rustle beside him. It was Juana, arising almost soundlessly. On her hard bare feet she went to the hanging box where Coyotito slept, and she leaned over and said a little reassuring word. Coyotito looked up for a moment and closed his eyes and slept again. Juana went to the fire and uncovered a coal and fanned it alive while she broke off little pieces of brush to cover it. Now Kino got up and wrapped his blanket about his head and nose and shoulders. He slipped his feet into his sandals and went outside to watch the dawn. Outside the door he squatted down and gathered the blanket ends about his knees. He saw the specks of golf cloud flame high in the air, and a goat come near and sniffed at him and stared with its cold yellow eyes. Behind him Juana's fire leaped in the flames and threw spears of light through the chinks of brush house wall and threw a wavering square of light out the door. A late moth blustered in to find the fire. The song of the family come now, further behind Kino, and the rhythm of the family song with a grinding stone where Juana worked the corn for the morning cakes. The dawn come quickly now, a wash, a glow, a lightness, and then an explosion of fire as the sun arose out of the gulf. Kino looked down to cover his eyes from the glare. He could hear the pat of the corn cakes in the house and the rich smell of them cooking on the cooking plate. The ants were busy on the ground, big black ones with shiny bodies, and little dusky quick ants. Kino watched with a detachment of God while a dusty ant frantically tried to escape the sand trap an antlion had dug for him. A thin, timid dog come close and, at a soft word from Kino, curled up and ranged his tail neatly over his feet and laid his chin delicately on the pile. It were a black dog with yellow gold spots, which eyebrows should have been. It were a morning like other mornings, and yet perfect among mornings. Kino heard the creak of the rope when Juana took Coyotito out of his hanging box and cleaned him and hammocked him in a shawl in a loop that placed him close to her breast. Kino could see the things without looking at them. Juana sang softly, an ancient song that had only the three notes and the endless variety of interval. And this was part of the family song too. It were all part. Sometimes it rose to an aching chord that caught the throat, saying this is safety, this is warmth, this is the old. Across the brush fence were other brush houses, and the smoke came too from them, and the sound of breakfast. But those were other songs. Their pigs were other pigs, their wives were not Juana. Kino was young and strong, and his black hair hung over his brown forehead. His eyes were warm and fierce and bright, and his moustache were thin and coarse. He lowered his blanket from his nose now, for the dark, poisonous air were gone, and the yellow sunlight fell on the house. Near the brush fence, two roosters bowed and fainted at each other with squared wings and neck feathers roughed out. It would be a clumsy fight. They were not game chickens. Kino watched them for a moment, and then his eyes went up to a flight of wild doves twinkling inland to the hills. The world were awake now, and Kino arose and went into his brush house. As he come through the door, Juana stood up from the glowing fire pit. She put Coyotito back into his hanging box, and then she combed her black hair and braided it into 2 braids, and tied the ends with thin green ribbon. Kino squatted by the fire pit, and rolled an hot corn cake, and dipped it in sauce and ate it. And he drank a little pulque, and that was breakfast. That was the only breakfast he had ever known outside of feast days, and one incredible fiesta on cookies that had nearly killed him. When Kino had finished, Juana came back to the fire and ate her breakfast. They had spoken once, but there is not need for speech if it is only habit anyway. Kino sighed with satisfaction, and that was conversation. The sun was warm in the brush house, breaking through its crevices in long streaks, and one of the streaks fell on the hanging box where Coyotito lay, and on the ropes that held it. It was a tiny movement that drew their eyes to the hanging box. Kino and Juana froze in their positions. Down the rope that hung the baby's box from the roof support, a scorpion moved slowly. His stinging tail was straight out behind him. He could whip it up in a flash of time. Kino's breath whistled in his nostrils, and he opened his mouth to stop it. And then the startled look was gone from him, and the rigidity of his body. In his mind a new song had come, the song of evil, the music of the enemy, of any foe of the family, a savage, secret, dangerous melody. And underneath, the song of the family cried plaintively. The scorpion moved delicately down the rope towards the box. Under her breath, Juana repeated an ancient magic to guard against such evil. On the top of that she muttered an Hail Mary between clenched teeth. But Kino were in motion. His body glided quietly across the room, noiselessly and smoothly. His hands were in front of him, palms down, and his eyes were on the scorpion. Beneath it, in the hanging box, Coyotito laughed and reached up his hand towards it. He sensed danger when Kino were almost within reach of it. He stopped, its tail rose over its back in little jerks, and the curved thorn on the tail's end glittered. Kino stood perfectly still. He could hear Juana whispering the old magic again, and he could hear the evil music of the enemy. He could not move until the scorpion moved, and it felt for the source of the death that would come into it. Kino's hand went forward very slowly, very smoothly. The thorn tail jerked upright, and at that moment, in the laughing Coyotito shook the rope, and the scorpion fell. Kino's hand leaped to catch it, but it fell past his fingers, fell on the baby's shoulder, landed and struck. Then, snarling, Kino had it, and he had it in his fingers, rubbing at the paste in his hands. He threw it down and beat it into the earth floor with his fist, and Coyotito screamed with pain in his box. But Kino beat and stamped the enemy until it were only a fragment and a moist place in the dirt. His teeth were bared and fury flared in his eyes, and the song of the enemy roared in his ears. But Juana had the baby in her arms now. She found the puncture with redness starting from it already. She put her lip down over the puncture and sucked hard and spat and sucked again while Coyotito screamed. Kino hovered. He were helpless. He were in the way. The screams of the baby brought the neighbours. Out of their brush houses they poured. Kino's brother Juan, Tomas and his fat wife, Apollina and their 4 children, crowded in the door and blocked the entrance. While behind them others tried to look in, and one small boy crawled among legs to have a look. And those in the front passed the word back to those behind. Scorpion, the baby has been stung. Juana stopped sucking the puncture for a moment. The hole was slightly enlarged, and its edges whitened from the sucking, but the red swelling extended farther around it in an hard lump, an emphatic mound. And all these people knew about the scorpion. An adult might be very ill from the sting, but a baby could easily die from the poison. First they knew it would come swelling and fever, and tightening throat, and cramps in the stomach, and then Coyotito might die if enough of the poison had gone in. But the sting and pain of the bite were going away. Coyotito's screams turned to moans. Kino had wondered often at the eye in his patient, fragile wife. She were obedient and respectful and cheerful and patient. She could arch her back in child pain with hardly a cry. She could stand fatigue and hunger almost better than Kino himself. In the canoe she were like a strong man, and now she did a most surprising thing. "The doctor," she said. "Go get the doctor." The word was passed out among the neighbours, where they stood close, packed in the little yard behind the brush fence, and they repeated among themselves, "Juana wants the doctor." A wonderful thing, a memorable thing to want the doctor. To get him would be a remarkable thing. The doctor now came with a cluster of brush houses. Why should he, when he had more than he could do to take care of the rich people who lived in the stone and plaster houses of the town? He would not come, the people in the yard said. He would not come, the people in the door said, and the thought got into Kino. The doctor would not come, Kino said to Juana. She looked up at him, her eyes as cold as the eyes of a lioness. This was Juana's first baby. This was nearly everything there was in Juana's world. And Kino saw her determination, and the music of the family sounded in his head with a steely tone. "And we will go to him," Juana said, and with one hand she arranged a dark blue shawl over her head, and made one end of it a sling to hold up the mourning baby, and made the other end of it a shade over his eyes to protect him from the light. The people in the door pushed against those behind to let her through. Kino followed her. They went out of the gate to the rotted path, and the neighbours followed them. The thing had become a neighbourhood affair. They made a quick, soft-footed procession in the centre of the town. First Juana and Kino, and behind them Juan Tomas and Apollina, a big stomach jiggling with a strenuous pace. Then all the neighbours, with the children trotting on the flanks, and the yellow sun threw their black shadows ahead of them, so that they walked on their own shadows. They come to the place where the brush houses stopped, and the city of stone and plaster begun, the city of arch outer walls and inner cool gardens, where a little water played, and the bougainvilleas crusted the walls purple, and brick red and white. They heard from the secret gardens and stinging of caged birds, and heard the splash of cooling water on hot flagstones. The procession crossed the Blind Plaza and passed in front of the church. It had grown now, and on the outskirts the Aryan newcomers were being softly informed how the baby had been stung by a scorpion, and the father and mother were taken to the doctor. And the newcomers, particularly the beggars from the front of the church, who were great experts in financial analysis, looked quickly at Juana's old blue skirt, saw the tears in her shawl, praised the green ribbon on her braids, read the age of Kino's blanket and 1,000 washings of his clothes, and set them down as poverty people, and went along to see what kind of drama might develop. The 4 beggars in front of the church knew everything in the town. They were students of the expression of young women as they went out to confession, and they saw them as they came out and read the nature of the sin. They knew every little scandal and some very big crimes. They slept at their posts in the shadow of the church, so that no one crept in for consolation without their knowledge. And they knew the doctor. They knew his ignorance, his cruelty, his avarice, his appetites, his sins. They knew his clumsy abortions and the little brown pennies he gave sparingly for alms. They had seen his corpse go into the church, and since early mass were over and business was slow, they followed the procession, these endless searches after perfect knowledge of their fellow men, to see what the fat, lazy doctor would do about an indigent baby with a scorpion bite. The scurrying procession come at last to the big gate in the wall of the doctor's house. They could hear the splash of water and the singing of caged birds, and the sweep of the long brooms on the flagstones. They could smell the frying of good bacon from the doctor's house. Kino hesitated a moment. The doctor were not of his people. The doctor were of a race who, nearly 400 years, had beaten and starved and robbed and despised Kino's race, and frightened it too, so that the indigene came humbly to the door. And as always when he came near to one of this race, Kino felt weak and afraid and angry all at the same time. Rage and terror went together. He could kill the doctor more easily than he could talk to him, for all the doctor's race spoke to all of Kino's race as though they were simple animals. And as Kino raised his right hand to the iron ring knocker in the gate, rage swelled in him, and the pounding muscle of the enemy beat in his music of the enemy beat in his ears, and his lips grew tight against his teeth. But with his left hand he reached to take off his hat. The iron ring pounded against the gate. Kino took off his hat and stood waiting. Coyotito moaned in Juana's arms, and she spoke softly to him. The procession crowded closer to the better to see her and hear. After a moment the big gate opened a few inches. Kino could see the green coolness of the garden and a little splashing fountain through the opening. The man who looked out at him was one of his own race. Kino spoke to him in the old language. The little one, the firstborn, has been poisoned by the scorpion, Kino said. He requires the skill of the healer. The gate closed a little, and the servant refused to speak in the old language. A little moment, he said. I go to inform myself. And he closed the gate and slid the bolt home. The glaring sun threw the bunched shadows of the poor peoples blackly over the white wall. In his chamber the doctor sat up in his bed. He had on his dressing gown of red watered silk that had come from Paris, a little tight over the chest now if it were buttoned. On his lap were a silver tray with a silver chocolate pot and a tiny cup of eggshell china, so delicate that it looked silly when he lifted it with his big hand, lifted it with the tips of thumb and forefinger, and spread the other 3 fingers wide to get them out of the way. His eyes rested in puffy little hammocks of flesh, and his mouth drooped with discontent. He was growing very stout, and his voice hoarse with the fat that pressed in on his throat. Beside him on the table were a small oriental gong and a bowl of cigarettes. The furnishings of the room were heavy and dark and gloomy. The pictures were religious, even the large timid photograph of his dead wife, who, if masses willed it and fell out of her own estate, could do it, were in heaven. The doctor had once, for a short time, been part of the great world His whole subsequent life were memory and longing for France. That, he said, was civilized living, by which he meant that on a small income he had been able to keep a mistress and eat in restaurants. He poured his second cup of chocolate and crumbled a sweet biscuit in his fingers. The servant from the gate came in the open door and stood waiting to be noticed. "Yes?" the doctor asked. "He's a little Indian boy with a baby. He says a scorpion sting it." The doctor put his cup down gently before he let his anger rise. "Have I nothing better to do than cure insect bites for little Indians? I am a doctor, not a veterinary." "Yes, patron," said the servant. "Has he any money?" the doctor demanded. "No, they never have any money. I alone in this world is supposed to work for nothing, and I am tired of it. See if he has any money." At the gate the servant opened the door a trifle and looked out at the waiting people, and this time he spoke in the old language. "Have you money to pay for the treatment?" Now Kina reached him the secret place somewhere under his blanket. He brought out paper folded many times. Crease by crease he unfolded it, until at last there came in the view 8 small misshapen seed pearls, as ugly and grey as little ulcers, flattened and almost valueless. The servant took the paper and closed the gate again. This time we were not gone long. He opened the gate just wide enough to pass the paper deck. "The doctor has gone out," he said. "He was called to a serious case." And he shut the gate quickly out of shame. And now a wave of shame went over the old procession. They melted away. The beggars went back to the church steps, the stragglers moved off, and the neighbours departed so the public shaming of Kino would not be in their eyes. For a long time Kino stood in front of the gate with Juana beside him. Slowly he put his suppliant hat back on his head. Then, without warning, he struck the gate a crushing blow with his fist. He looked down in wonder at his split knuckles and at the blood that flowed down between his fingers. And that's the end of chapter 1. We have, it would seem, a pretty classic setup. A man and his family, the child, sick, and needed medicine, and rejected by a doctor, cruel and fat and foreign, looking down on the people he is meant to be treating. A dreadful shame. A dreadful shame indeed. Right, let's have a quick drink of water before we go on. So we're in India somewhere, and given the mention of France, I suppose somewhere in one of the French territories of India. Oh, I say that, perhaps it's America. I was taking Indian to be literal, but I suppose it could also be the time for Native American. I don't know if you have scorpions in India. I believe you do in South America, so maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to think what else we have here. The music is interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it yet, but I suspect it's going to be a motif running throughout things. And of course you have the anger, the terrible just anger of a righteous man. And worse of an impotently righteous man. That's going to bring trouble. But I don't have much more to say. My throat is still quite dry, so I'll have another quick drink and then we'll press on. Chapter 2. The town lay on a broad estuary, its old yellow plaster buildings hugging the beach, and on the beach the white and blue canoes that came up from that near it were all drawn up, canoes pressed for generations by hard shell-like waterproof plaster, whose making were a secret of the fishing people. They were high and graceful canoes with curving bow and stern, and a brace section midships where masts could be stepped to carry a small lantern sail, or lateen sail. The beach were yellow sand, At the water's edge, a rubble of shell and algae took its place. Fiddler crabs bubbled and sputtered in their holes in the sand, and in the shallows little lobsters popped in and out of their tiny homes in the rubble and sand. The sea bottom were rich with crawling and swimming and growing things. The brown algae waved in the gentle currents, and the green eel grass swayed while the little seahorses clung to its stems. Spotted botete, the poison fish, lay on the bottom of the eel grass beds, but the bright-coloured swimming crabs scampered over them. On the beach, the hungry dogs and the hungry pigs of the town searched endlessly for any dead fish or seabird that might have floated in on a rising tide. Although the morning were young, the hazy mirage were up. The uncertain air that magnified some things and blotted out others hung over the old Gulf. The Gulf? Of course it's got to be South America. Over the old Gulf, so that all sights were unreal and visions could not be trusted. So that sea and land had the sharp clarities and the vagueness of a dream. Thus it might be that the people of the Gulf trust things of the spirit and things of the imagination, but they do not trust their eyes to show them the distance, or clear outline, or any optical exactness. Across the estuary from the town, one section of mangroves stood clear and telescopically defined, while another mangrove clump were an hazy black-green blob. Part of the far shore disappeared into a shimmer that looked like water. There were no certainty in seeing, no proof that what you saw were there or were not there. And the people of the Gulf expected all places were that way, and it were not strange to them. A copper haze hung over the water, and the hot morning sun beat on it and made it vibrate blindingly. The brush houses of the fishing people were back from the beach, on the right-hand side of the town, and the canoes were drawn up in front of this area. Kino and Juana come slowly down to the beach, and Aquino's canoe, which was the one thing of value he owned in the world. It was very old. Kino's grandfather had brought it from Nayarit, and he had given it to Kino's father until it had come to Kino. It was once property and source of food, for a man with a boat can guarantee a woman that she will eat something. It is a bulwark against starvation, and every year Kino refinished his canoe with the hard shell-like plaster by the secret method that had also come to him from his father. Now he come to the canoe and touched the bow tenderly, as he always did. He laid his diving rock and his basket and the 2 ropes in the sand by the canoe, and he folded his blanket and laid it in the bow. Juana laid Coyotito on the blanket, and she placed her shawl over him so the hot sun could not shine on him. He was quiet now, but the swelling in the shoulder had continued up his neck and under his ear, and his face was puffed and feverish. Juana went to the water and waded in. She gathered some brown seaweed and made a flat, damp poultice of it, and this she applied to the baby's swollen shoulder, which were as good as remedy as any, and probably better than the doctor could have done. But the remedy lacked his authority, because it was simple and didn't cost anything. The stomach cramps had not come to Coyotito. Perhaps Juana had sucked out the poison in time, but she had not sucked out her worry over her firstborn. She had not prayed directly for the recovery of the baby. She had prayed that they might find a pearl with which to hire the doctor to cure the baby, for the minds of people are as unsubstantial as the mirage of the Gulf. Now Quino and Juana slid the canoe down the beach to the water. When the bow floated, Juana climbed in, while Quino pushed the stern in and waded beside it until it floated lightly and trembled up the little breaking waves. Then, in coordination, Juana and Quino drove their double-bladed paddles into the sea, and when the canoe creased the water and hissed with speed, the other pearlers were gone out long since. In a few moments Quino could see them, clustered in the haze, riding over the oyster bed. Light filtered down the water to the bed where the frilly pearl oysters lay fastened to the rubbly bottom, a bottom strewn with shells of broken opened oysters. This was the bed that had raised the King of Spain to be a great power in Europe in past years. It had helped to pay for his wars, and had decorated the churches for his soul's sake. The grey oysters with ruffle-like skirts on the shells, the barnacle-crusted oysters with little bits of weed clinging to the skirts and small crabs climbing over them. An accident could happen to these oysters. A grain of sand could lie on the folds of muscle and irritate the flesh, until in self-protection the flesh coated the grain with a layer of smooth cement. Once started, the flesh continued to coat the foreign body, until it fell free in some tidal flurry or other, or until the oyster was destroyed. For centuries men had dived down and torn the oysters from the beds, and ripped them open, looking for the coated grains of sand. Swarms of fish lived near the bed to live near the oysters thrown back in by the searching men, and to nibble at the shining inner shells. But the pearls were accidents, and the finding of one were luck, a little pat on the back by God, or the gods, or both. Keno had 2 ropes, one tied to a heavy stone and one to his basket. He stripped off his shirt and trousers and laid his hat in the bottom of the canoe. The water oil smooth. He took his rock in one hand and his basket in the other, and he slipped his feet over the side, and the rock carried him to the bottom. The bubbles rose behind him until the water cleared, and they could see above, and he could see. Above the surface of the water, an undulating mirror of brightness, and he could see the bottoms of the canoe sticking through it. Keno moved cautiously, so the water would not be obscured with mud or sand. He hooked his foot in the loop on his rock, and his hands worked quickly, tearing the oysters loose, some singly, others in clusters. He laid them in his basket. In some places the oysters clung to one another, so they come in free in lumps. Now Keno's people had sung of everything that happened or existed. They had made songs to the fishes, to the sea in anger and to the sea in calm, to the light and the dark and the sun and the moon, and the songs were all in Keno and in his people. Every song that had ever been made, even the ones forgotten. And as he filled his basket, the song was in Keno, and the beat of the song was his pounding heart, as it ate the oxygen from his held breath, and the melody of the song were the grey-green water, and the little scuttling animals, and the clouds of fish that flitted by and were gone. In the song there was a secret little inner song, hardly perceptible, but always there, sweet and secret and clinging, almost hiding in the counter-melody. And this was the song of the pearl that might be, for every shell thrown in the basket might contain a pearl. Chances were against it, but luck and the gods might be for it. And in the canoe above him, Keno knew that Juana were making the magic of prayer, her face set rigid and her muscles hard, to force the luck, tear the luck out of the god's hands, for she needed the luck on the swollen shoulder of Coyotito. And because the need were great and the desire were great, the little secret melody of the pearl that might be was stronger this morning. Whole phrases of it came clearly and softly into the song of the undersea. Keno in his pride and youth and strength could remain down over 2 minutes without strain, so he worked deliberately, selecting the largest shells. Because they were disturbed, the oyster shells were tightly closed. A little to his right, a hummock of rubbly rocks stuck up, covered with young oysters not ready to take. Keno moved next to the hummock, and then beside it, under a little overhang, he saw a very large oyster lying by itself, not covered with its clinging brothers. The shell was partly open. The overhang protected this ancient oyster, and in the lip-like muscle, Keno saw a ghostly gleam, and then the shell closed down. His heart beat out a heavy rhythm, and the melody of the baby pearl shrilled in his ears. Slowly he forced the oyster loose and held it tight against his breast. He kicked his foot free from the rock loop, and his body rose to the surface, and his black hair gleamed in the sunlight. He reached over the side of the canoe and laid the oyster in the bottom. And Juana steadied the boat while he climbed in. His eyes were shining with excitement, but in decency he pulled up his rock, and then he pulled up his basket of oysters and lifted them in. Juana sensed his excitement, and she pretended to look away. It is not good to want a thing too much. It sometimes drives the luck away. He must want it just enough, and must be very tactful with God, or the gods. But Juana stopped breathing. Very deliberately, Keno opened his short, strong knife. He looked speculatively at the basket. Perhaps it would be better to open the oyster last. He took a small oyster from the basket, cut the muscle, searched the folds of flesh, and threw it in the water. Then he seemed to see the great oyster for the first time. He squatted in the bottom of the canoe, picked up the shell and examined it. The flutes were shining black to brown, and only a few small barnacles adhered to the shell. Now Keno were reluctant to open it. What he had seen he knew might be a reflection, a piece of flat shell accidentally drifted in, or a complete illusion. In this gulf of uncertain light there were no more illusions than reality. But Juana's eyes were on him and she could not wait. She put her hands on Coyotito's covered head. "Open it," she said softly. Keno deftly slipped his knife into the edge of the shell. Through the knife he could feel the muscle tighten hard. He worked the blade lever-wise, and the closing muscle parted and the shell fell apart. The lip-like flesh writhed up and then subsided. Kino lifted the flesh, and there it lay, a great pearl, perfect as the moon. It captured the light and refined it, and gave it black in silver incandescence, gave it back in silver incandescence. It was as large as a seagull's egg. It was the greatest pearl in the world. Juana caught her breath and moaned a little, and Aquino, the secret melody of the maybe pearl, broke clear and beautiful, rich and warm and lovely, glowing and gloating and triumphant. In the surface of the great pearl he could see dream forms. He picked the pearl from the drying flesh and held it in his palm, and he turned it over and saw that its curves were perfect. Juana came near to stare at it in his hand, and it was the hand he had smashed against the doctor's gate, and the torn flesh of the knuckles were turned greyish white by the seawater. Instinctively Juana went to Coyotito, where he lay on his father's blanket. She lifted the poultice of seaweed and looked at the shoulder. "Kino," she cried shrilly. He looked past his pearl and saw the swelling were going out of the baby's shoulder. The poison was receding from its body. Then Kino's fist closed over the pearl, and his emotion broke over him. He put back his head and howled. His eyes rolled up and he screamed, and his body were rigid. The men in the other canoes looked up, startled, and they dug their paddles into the sea and raced towards Kino's canoe. That's the end of chapter 3. The greatest pearl in the world, eh? Suppose it makes sense, eh? Novel's named after it. Let me have my drink. It's interesting how in some stories you find a perspective like that. Specifically, I'm thinking about the perspective on the fields of oysters. Because it's true, really, of everything in the world. Anything you look at has an history like that. A field of oysters that rose the King of Spain. An house where people have lived. A chair where everyone sat, you know? The old past of a thing makes the thing. And perhaps they aren't always so grand as raising kings and decorating churches. But the history of a thing makes it. It's somehow intrinsic to it. It's a major part of it. And yet you can never know the old history of a thing, can you? Not really. When here we see a good chunk of the history, an important fragment of it, seen from the perspective of the author and the omniscient narrator. But how much of things is other things? How much of the world is illusions? You kind of want oysters now. Well, I imagine they'd be pretty good if they were that fresh, eh? Can't say I know. I don't think I've ever had oysters. Don't tend to put them, where a rat can get them. Sadly enough. But yeah, I think we are clearly in the Gulf of Mexico. It's odd, really. The way you can see a world walking as though through dreams. It's a familiar perspective. A familiar perspective indeed. And the greatest pearl in the world. Let's find out what he does with it. Chapter 3. A town is a thing like a colonial animal. A town has a nervous system and an head and shoulders and feet. A town is a thing separate from all the other towns, so that there are no two towns alike. A town has a whole emotion. How news travels through a town is mysterious, not easily to be solved. News seems to move faster than small boys can scramble and dark to tell it, faster than women can call it over their fences. Before Kino and Juana and the other fishers had come to Kino's brush house, the nerves of the town were pulsing and vibrating with the news. Kino had found the pearl of the world. Before panting little boys could strangle out the words, their mothers knew it. The news swept on past the brush houses, and it washed in foaming waves into the town of stone and plaster. It came to the priest, walking in his garden, and it put a thoughtful look on in his eyes, and a memory of certain repairs necessary at the church. He wondered what the pearl would be worth, and he wondered whether he had baptised Kino's baby, or married him for that matter. And the news came from the shopkeepers, and they looked at men's clothes that had not sold so well. The news came to the doctor, where he sat with a woman whose illness were age, though neither she nor the doctor would admit it. And when it was made plain who Kino was, the doctor grew stern and judicious at the same time. "He is a client of mine," the doctor said, "and I am treating his child for a scorpion sting." And the doctor's eyes rolled up a little in their fat hummocks, and he thought of Paris. He remembered the room he had lived in there as a great and luxurious place, and he remembered the odd-faced woman who had lived with him as a beautiful, calm girl, although she had been none of these three. The doctor looked past his aged patient and saw himself sitting in a restaurant in Paris, and a waiter just opening a bottle of wine. The news came early to the beggars in front of the church, and it made them giggle a little with pleasure. They knew that there is no almsgiver in the world like a poor man who was suddenly lucky. Kino had found the pearl of the world. In the town, in little offices, sat the men who had bought pearls from the fishers. They waited in their chairs until the pearls came in, and then they cackled and fought and shouted and threatened until they reached the lowest price the fisherman would stand. They were a price below which they had dared not go, for it happened that fisherman in despair had given his pearls to the church, and when the buying were over, his buyer sat alone, and their fingers played restlessly with the pearls, and they wished they owned the pearls. But there were not many buyers, really. There were only one, and he kept these agents in separate offices to give a semblance of competition. The news came to these men, and their eyes squinted, and their fingertips burned a little, and each one thought how the patron could not live forever, and someone had to take his place. And each one thought how, with some cattle, he could get a new start. All manner of people grew interested in Kino, people with things to sell and people with favours to ask. Kino had found the pearl of the world. The essence of pearl mixed with essence of men and curious dark residue were precipitated. Every man suddenly became related to Kino's pearl, and Kino's pearl went into the dreams, the speculations, the schemes, the plans, the futures, the wishes, the needs, the lusts, the hungers of everyone. And only one person stood in the way, and that was Kino, so that he became curiously every man's enemy. The news stirred up something infinitely black and evil in the town. The black distillate were like a scorpion, or like hunger in the smell of food, or like loneliness when love is withheld. The poison sacs of the town began to manufacture venom, and the town swelled and puffed with the pressure of it. But Kino and Juana did not know these things. Because they were happy and excited, they thought everyone shared their joy. Juan Tomas and Apollina did, and they were the world too. In the afternoon, when the sun had gone over the mountains, the peninsula, the sink and the outward sea, Kino squatted in his house with Juana behind him, and the brush house was crowded with neighbours. Kino held the great pearl in his hand, and it was warm and alive in his hand. And the music of the pearl had merged with the music of the family, so that one beautified the other. The neighbours looked at the pearl in Kino's hands, and they wondered how such luck could come to any man. And Juan Tomas, who squatted over on Kino's right hand, because he was his brother, asked, "What will you do now that you've become a rich man?" Kino looked into his pearl, and Juana cast her eyelashes down and arranged her shawl to cover her face, so that her excitement could not be seen. And the incandescence of the pearl, the pictures formed of the things Kino's mind had considered in the past and had given up as impossible. In the pearl he saw Juana and Coyotito and himself standing and kneeling at the high altar, and they were being married now that they could pay. He spoke softly. "We'll be married in the church." In the pearl he saw how they were dressed. Juana in a shawl, stiff with newness, and a skirt. From under the long skirt, Kino could see that she wore shoes. He were in the pearl, the picture glowing there. He himself was dressed in new white clothes, and he carried a new hat, not a straw but a fine black felt. And he too wore shoes, not sandals but shoes that laced. But Coyotito, he were the one. He wore a blue sailor suit from the United States, and a little yachting cap such as Kino had once seen when a pleasure boat put in the estuary. All of these things Kino saw in the lucid pearl, and he said, "We all have new clothes." And the music of the pearl rose like a chorus of trumpets in his ears. Then to the lovely grey surface of the pearl came the little things Kino wanted. An harpoon to take place of one lost a year ago. A new harpoon of iron with a ring in the end of the shaft. And, his mind could hardly make it at the leap, a rifle. But why not, since he was so rich? And Keno saw Keno in the pole, Keno holding the Winchester carbine. It was the wildest daydream and very pleasant. His lips moved pleasantly over this. A rifle, he said. Perhaps a rifle. It was the rifle that broke down the barriers. This were an impossibility. And if he could think of having a rifle, whole horizons would burst and he could rush it on. For it is said that humans are never satisfied, that you give them one thing and they want something more. And this is said in disparagement, whereas it is one of the greatest talents in the species, as one that has made it superior to animals that are satisfied with what they have. The neighbours, close pressed and silent in the house, nodded their heads at his wild imaginings, and a man in the rear mumbled, "A rifle, we'll have a rifle." But the music of the pole was shrilling with triumph from Keno. Juana looked up, and her eyes were wide at Keno's courage and his imagination. An electric strength had come to him now that the horizons were kicked out. In the pole he saw Coyotito sitting at a little desk in the school, just as Keno had once seen it through an open door. And Coyotito was dressed in a jacket, and he had on a white collar and a broad silken tie. Moreover, Coyotito was writing on a big piece of paper. Keno looked at his neighbours fiercely. "My son will go to school," he said, and the neighbours rushed. Juana caught her breath sharply. Her eyes were bright as she watched him, and she looked quickly down at Coyotito in her arms to see whether this might be possible. But Keno's face shone with prophecy. "My son will read and open the books, and my son will write and will know writing, and my son will make numbers, and these things will make us free because he will know. He will know, and through him we will know." And in the pole, Keno saw himself and Juana squatting by the little fire in the brush-up, while Coyotito read from a great book. "This is what the pole will do," said Keno, and he had never said so many words together in his life. And suddenly you were afraid of his talking. His hand closed down over the pole and cut the light away from it. Keno were afraid as a man is afraid who says, "I will," without knowing. Now the neighbours knew that they had witnessed a great marvel. They knew that time would now date from Keno's pole, and they would discuss them at this moment for many years to come. If these things come to pass, they would recount how Keno looked, and what he said and how his eyes shone, and they would say, he was a man transfigured. Some power was given to him, and there it started. You see what a great man he has become, starting from that moment, and I myself saw it. And if Keno's plan came to nothing, those same neighbours would say, there it started. A foolish madness came over him, so he spoke foolish words. God keeps us from such things. Yes, God punished Keno because he rebelled against the way things are. You see what has become of him, and I myself saw the moment when his reason left him. Keno looked down at his closed hands, and the knuckles were scabbed over and tight where he had struck the gate. Now the dusk were coming, and Juana looped her shawl under the baby so that he hung against her hip, and she went to the fire hole and dug a coal from the ashes and broke a few twigs over it and found the flame alive. The little flame danced on the faces of the neighbours. They knew they should go to their own dinners, but they were reluctant to leave. The dark were almost in, and Juana's fire threw shadows on the brush walls, and the whisper came in, passed from mouth to mouth. The father is coming, the priest is coming. The men uncovered their heads and stepped back from the door, and the women gathered their shawls about their faces and cast down their eyes. Keno and Juan Tomas, his brother, stood up. The priest came in, a grey and aged man with old skin and with young sharp eyes. Children, he considered these people, and he treated them like children. "Kuna," he said softly, "thou art named after a great man, and a great father of the church." He made it sound like a benediction. "Thy namesake tamed the desert, and sweetened the minds of thy people. Didst thou know that? It is in the books." Keno looked quickly down at Coyotito's head, who hung on Juana's lap. Some day, his mind said, that boy would know what things were in the books and what things were not. The music had gone out of Keno's head, but now thinly, slowly, the melody of the morning, the music of evil and the enemies sounded, but it was faint and weak. And Keno looked at his neighbours to see who might have brought this song in. But the priest was speaking again. "It has come to me that thou hast found a great fortune, a great pearl." Keno opened his hand and held it out, and the priest gasped a little at the size and beauty of the pearl. And then he said, "I hope thou wilt remember to give thanks, my son, to him who has given thee this treasure, and to pray for guidance in the future. Kino nodded dumbly, and it was Juana who spoke softly. We will, father, and we will be married now. Kino has said so. She looked at the neighbours for confirmation, and they nodded their heads solemnly. The priest said, It is pleasant to see that your first thoughts are good thoughts. God bless you, my children. He turned and left quietly, and the people let him through. Akina's hand had closed tightly on the pole again, and he would glance about suspiciously, for the evil song were in his ears, shrilling against the music of the pole. The neighbours slipped away to go to their houses, and Juana squatted by the fire and set up a clay pot of baked beans over the boiled beans over the little flame. Kino stepped away to the doorway and looked out. As always, he could smell the smoke from many fires, and he could see the hazy stars, and feel the damp of the night air so that it covered his nose from it. The thin dog came to him and threshed itself in greeting like a wind-blown flag, and Kino looked down at it and didn't see it. It had broken through the horizon and looked cold and lonely outside. Ooh, ad break. Pause then for the ad break. Not that apparently the ad break is ever necessarily there, but it tells me there's an ad break, and if there is an ad break, I don't want to be denying people a chance to listen and lose their place in the story, so we'll take a break. I'll have a little supplementary drink. And then I'll try and find something else to talk about. This is the other talk about that hasn't come up much in this book, so it won't be relevant. I suppose the sea. It's odd, really. They live by the sea, and there are people who they're living by fishing, but the actual coverage of the sea itself has been quite minor. Not non-existent. I mean, there's an amount of it, and especially with the whole coverage of the Gulf, there's not an insignificant element of of the ocean as a theme, but primarily it's been pretty secondary to the actual story itself. It's odd, really. What else? Is there anything else? Don't know, really. I'm just trying to fill space here, because I don't want to be reading parts of the story when people might miss it. But I also don't really have anything to say. I could talk more about myself, but I'm just a rat. Not a lot of interest about a rat. And I don't want to talk about the bad book. Let's talk about cursed items. There's some interesting ones. What interesting ones have I seen today? There was one that was in the room with the saddle that I got stuck on. It was I almost want to say a knife, but it was more like a letter opener. Like the blade was sort of like shaped like a diamond, so it wasn't really sharp. But you could use it to open letters, and it sort of glowed with like darkness, like the same way light comes off of an object that is emitting light, but it was darkness that was coming off it, like it was sucking the light away. And it was hovering sort of point down, just a couple of inches off of the stone floor. And when you were close to it, you could sort of feel, like, you know how if you hear a sound that's loud enough and has enough bass, you can feel it? It was like that, but there was no sound to it, you just felt the bass of it. Anyway, that's the sort of like really obvious cursed item you sometimes see, and I know better than to go near those, so just avoid them. But yeah, is there anything else notable about it? Oh yeah, I guess it was hovering above the floor, but it also seemed to be like grinding a hole in it over the course of years. But yeah, anyway, that should be the ad break over. So no need to keep pressing on that. Where are we? The thin dog came up to him and threshed itself in greeting like a wind-blown flag, and Kino looked down at it and didn't see it. He had broken through the horizon and looked cold and lonely outside. He felt alone and unprotected, and scraping crickets and shrilling tree frogs and croaking toads seemed to be carrying the melody of evil. Kino shivered a little and drew his blanket more tightly against his nose. He carried the pole still in his hands, tightly closed in his palm, and it was warm and smooth against his skin. Behind him he heard Juana patting the cakes before she put them down on the clay cooking sheet. Kino felt all the warmth and security of his family behind him, and the song of the family come from behind him like the purring of a kitten. But now, by saying what his future was going to be like, he had created it. A plan is a real thing, and things projected are experienced. A plan once made and visualised becomes a reality, along with other realities, never to be destroyed, but easily to be attacked. Us Kino's future were real, but having set it up, other forces were set up to destroy it, and this he knew, so they had to prepare to meet the attack. And this Kino knew also that the gods do not love men's plans, and the gods do not love success, and that it comes by accident. He knew that the gods take their own revenge on a man if he'd be successful through his own efforts. Consequently, Kino were afraid of plans, but having made one, he could never destroy it. And to meet the attack, Kino were already making an hard skin for himself against the world. His eyes and his mind probed the danger before it appeared. Standing in the door, he saw two men approach, and one of them carried a lantern which lay on the ground and the legs of the men. They turned in through the opening of Kino's brush fence and come to his door. And Kino saw that one was the doctor and the other the servant who would open the gate in the morning. The split knuckles on Kino's right hand burned when he saw who they were. The doctor said, "I was not in when you came this morning, but now at the first chance I have come to see the baby." Kino stood in the door, feeling it, and hatred raged and flamed in the back of his eyes. And fear too, for the hundreds of years of subjugation will cut deep into him. "The baby is nearly well now," he said curtly. The doctor smiled, but his eyes in their little lymph-lined hammocks did not smile. He said, "Sometimes, my friend, the scorpion sting has a curious effect. There will be apparent improvement, and then without warning, poof!" He pursed his lips and made a little explosion to show how quick it could be, and he shifted his small black doctor's bag about so that the light of the lamp fell upon it, for he knew that Kino's race loved the tools of any craft and trusted them. Sometimes, the doctor went on in a liquid tone, sometimes there will be a withered leg, or a blind eye, or a crumpled back. Oh, I know the sting of the scorpion, my friend, and I can cure it." Kino felt the anger and hatred melting towards fear. He did not know, and perhaps this doctor did, and he could not take the chance of pitting his certain ignorance against this man's possible knowledge. He was trapped as his people were always trapped, and would be until, as he had said, they could be sure that the things in the books were really in the books. He could not take the chance, not with the laugh or with the strain of Koyatita. He stood aside and let the doctor and his man enter the brush up. Juana stood up from the fire and backed away as he entered, and she covered the baby's face with the fringe of her shawl. And when the doctor went to her and held out his hand, she clutched the baby tight and looked at Kino where he stood, and the fire shadows leaping in his face. Kino nodded, and only then did she let the doctor take the baby. "Hold the light," the doctor said. When the servant held the lantern hard, the doctor looked for a moment at the wound on the baby's shoulder. He all thought for a moment, and then he rolled back the baby's eyelid and looked at the eyeball. He nodded his head while Koyatito struggled against him. "It is as I thought," he said. "The poison has gone inward and will strike soon. Come look." He held the eyelid down. "See, it is blue." And Kino, looking anxiously, saw that indeed it was a little blue, and he didn't know whether or not it were always a little blue. The trap was set. He couldn't take the chance. The doctor's eyes watered their little hammocks. "I would give him something to try and turn the poison aside," he said, and handed the baby to Kino. Then from his bag he took a little bottle of white powder and a capsule of gelatin. He filled the capsule with the powder and closed it, and then around the first capsule he fitted a second capsule and closed it. Then he worked very deftly. He took the baby and pinched its lower lip until it opened its mouth. His fat fingers placed the capsule far back on the baby's tongue, back from the point where he could spit it out, and then from the floor he picked up a little pitcher of pulque and gave Quixote a drink, and it was done. He looked again at the baby's eyeball, and he pursed his lips and seemed to think. At last he handed the baby back to Juana, and he turned to Kino. "I think the poison will attack within the hour," he said. "The medicine may save the baby from hurt, but I will come back in an hour. Perhaps I am in time to save him." He took a deep breath and went out of the hut, and his servant followed them with a lantern. Now Juana had the baby under her shawl, and she stared at it with anxiety and fear. Kino came to her, and he lifted the shawl and stared at the baby. He moved his hand to look under the eyelid, and only then saw that the pearl was still in his hand. Then he went to a box by the wall, and from it he brought a piece of rag. He wrapped the pearl in the rag, and then went to the corner of the brush house, and dug a little hole with his fingers on the dirt floor. He put the pearl in the hole and covered it up and concealed the place. And then he went to the fire where Juana was squatting, watching the baby's face. The doctor, back in his house, settled into his chair and looked at his watch. His people brought him a little supper of chocolate and sweet cakes and fruit, and he stared at the food discontentedly. In the houses of the neighbours, the subjects that would lead all conversations for a long time to come were aired for the first time to see how it would go. The neighbours showed one another with their thumbs how big the pearl was, and they made little caressing gestures to show how lovely it was. From now on they would watch Kino and Juana very closely and see whether the riches turn their heads, as riches turn all people's heads. Everyone knew why the doctor had come. He were not good at dissembling, and he were very well understood. Out in the estuary, a tarp-woven school of small fishes glittered and broke water to escape a school of great fishes that drove in to eat them. And in the houses of the people they could hear the swish of the small ones and the bounce and splash of the great one as the slaughter went on. A dampness arose out of the gulf and was deposited on the bushes and cacti, on the little trees and salty drops. And the night mice crept about on the ground, and the little night hawks hunted them silently. A skinny black puppy with flame spots over his eyes come to Kino's door and looked in. He nearly shook his hindquarters loose when Kino glanced up at him, and he subsided when Kino looked away. The puppy did not enter the house, but he watched with frantic interest, while Kino ate his beans from the little pottery dish and wiped it clean with a corn cake, and ate the cake, and washed the hole down with a pink drink of pulque. Kino were finished, and he were rolling a cigarette when Juana spoke sharply. "Kino." He glanced at her, and then he got up and went quickly to her, for he saw fright in her eyes. He stood over her, looking down, but the light was very dim. He kicked a pile of twigs into the fire to make a blaze, and then he could see the face of Coyotito. The baby's face was flushed, and his throat was working, and a little thick drool of saliva issued from his lips. The spasm of the stomach muscles begun, and the baby was very sick. Kino knelt beside his wife. So the doctor knew, he said. He said it for himself as well as for his wife. His mind were hard and suspicious, and he were remembering the white powder. Juana rocked from side to side and mounted out the little song of the family, and moaned out the little song of the family, as though it could ward off the danger, and the baby vomited and writhed in her arms. Now uncertainty were in Kino, and the music of evil throbbed in his head, and nearly drove out Juana's song. The doctor finished his chocolate and nibbled the little fallen pieces of sweet cake. He brushed his fingers on a napkin, looked at his watch, arose, and took up his little bag. The news of the baby's illness travelled quickly around the brush house, for sickness is second only to hunger as the enemies of poor people. And son said softly, "Luck, you see, brings bitter friends." And then Eldon got up to go to Kino's house. The neighbours scuttled with covered noses through the dark until they crowded into Kino's house again. They stood and gazed, and they made little comments on the sadness that this should happen at the time of joy. And they said all things are in God's hands. The old woman squatted down beside Juana to try and give her aid if they could, and comfort if they could not. Then the doctor hurried in, followed by his man. He scattered the old women like chickens. He took the baby and examined it and felt its head. The poison it has worked, he said. I think I can defeat it. I will try my best. He asked for water, and in the cup of it he put 3 drops of ammonia. And he pried open the baby's mouth and poured it down. The baby spluttered and screeched under the treatment, and Hannah watched him with haunted eyes. The doctor spoke a little as he worked. It's lucky that I know about the poison of the scorpion otherwise, and he shrugged to show what could have happened. But Kino was suspicious, and he could not take his eyes from the doctor's open bag, and from the bottle of white powder there. Gradually the spasm subsided, and the baby relaxed under the doctor's hands, and then Coyotito sighed deeply and went to sleep, for he was very tired with vomiting. The doctor put the baby in Juana's arms. You will get well now, he said. I have won the fight. And Juana looked at him with adoration. The doctor was closing his bag now. He said, When do you think you can pay this bill? He said it even calmly. When I have sold my pearl, I will pay you, Kino said. You have a pearl? A good pearl? The doctor asked with interest. And then the chorus of the neighbours broke in. He has found the pearl of the world, they cried, and they joined the forefinger with thumb to show how great the pearl was. Kino will be a rich man, they clamoured. It is a pearl such as one has never seen. The doctor looked surprised. I had not heard of it. Do you keep this pearl in a safe place? Perhaps you would like me to put it in my safe. Kino's eyes were riddled now, his cheeks were drawn taut. I have it secure, he said. Tomorrow I will sell it, and then I will pay you. The doctor shrugged, and his wet eyes never left Kino's eyes. He knew the pearl would be buried in the house, and he thought Kino might look towards the place where it was buried. It would be a shame to have it stolen before you could sell it, the doctor said, and he saw Kino's eyes flick involuntarily to the floor near the side of the post of the brush house. When the doctor had gone, all the neighbours had reluctantly returned their houses. Kino squatted beside the little glowing coals in the fire hole, and listened to the tight sound, the soft sweep of the little waves on the shore, and the distant barking of dogs, the creeping of the breeze through the brush house roof, and the soft speech of his neighbours in their houses in the village. For these people do not sleep soundly all night. They awaken at intervals and talk a little, and then go to sleep again. And after a while, Kino got up and went to the door of his house. He smelled the breeze, and he listened for any foreign sound or secrecy or creeping, and his eyes searched the darkness, for the music of evil was something in his head, and he was fierce and afraid. And after he had probed the night with his senses, he went to the place by the side post where his pearl was buried, and he dug it up and brought it to his sleeping mat. And under his sleeping mat he dug another little hole in the dirt and buried the pearl and covered it up again. And Wina, sitting by the fire hole, watched him with questioning eyes. And when he had buried his pearl, she asked, "Who do you fear?" Kino searched for a true answer, and at last he said, "Everyone." And he could feel a shallow hardness drawing over him. After a while they lay down together on the sleeping mat, and Wina did not put the baby in his box tonight, but cradled him in her arms and covered his face with her head shawl. And the last light went out of the embers of the fire hole. But Kino's brain burned, even during his sleep, and he dreamed Koyotita could read, and that one of his own people could tell him the truth of things. And in his dreams Koyotita were reading from a book as large as an house, with letters as big as dogs, and the world galloped and played on the book, and the words galloped and played on the book. And then darkness spread over the page, and with the darkness came the music of evil again. And Kino stirred in his sleep, and when he stirred, one of his eyes opened in the darkness. And Kino awakened with the evil music pushing in and pulsing in him, and he lay in the darkness with his ears alert. Then from the corner of the house came a sound so soft that it might have been simply a thought, a little furtive movement, a touch of foot on earth, the almost inaudible purr of controlled breathing. Kino held his breath to listen, and he knew that whatever dark thing were in his house were holding its breath too to listen. For a time no sound at all came from the corner of the brush house, and Kino might have thought he had imagined the sound. But Wina's hand came creeping over to him in mourning, and then the sound came again. A whisper of a foot on dry earth, and the scratch of fingers on the soil. And now a wild fear surged in Kino's breast, and on the fear come rage, as it always did. Kino's hand crept into his breast where his knife hung on a string, and then he sprang like an hungry cat, leapt striking and spitting for the dark thing he knew were in the corner of the house. He felt cloth struck at it with his knife and missed, and struck again and felt his knife go through the cloth, and then his head crashed with lightning and exploded with pain. There was a soft scurry in the doorway and running steps for a moment, and then silence. Kino could feel warm blood rushing from his forehead, and he could hear Wina calling to him, "Kino, Kino," and there was terror in her voice, and coldness came over him as quickly as the rage had, and he said, "I'm all right. The thing is gone." He groped his way back to the sleeping mat. Already Wina was working the fire. She uncovered an ember from the ash and shredded little pieces of corn husk over it, and blew a little flame into the corn husk so that the tiny light danced through the hut. And then from a secret place Wina brought a little piece of consecrated candle and lighted it at the flame, and set it upright on a fireplace stone. She worked quickly, crooning as she moved about. She dipped the end of her head shawl in water and swabbed the blood from Kino's bruised forehead. "It is nothing," Kino said. His eyes and his voice were hard and cold, and a brooding ache were growing in him. Now the tension which had been growing in Wina boiled up to the surface, and her lips were thin. "This thing is evil," she cried harshly. "The pearl is like a sin. It will destroy us." And her voice rose shrilly. "Throw it away, Kino. Let us break it between stones. Let us bury it and forget the place. Let us throw it back into the sea. It has brought evil, Kino, my husband. It will destroy us." In the firelight her lips and her eyes were alarmed with her fear. But Kino's face was set, and his mind and his will were set. "This is our one chance," he said. "Our son must go to school. He must break out of the pot that holds us in." "It will destroy us all," Wina cried. "Even our son. Hush, said Keno. Do not speak any more. In the morning we will sell the pearl, and then the evil will be gone, and only the good remain. Now hush, my wife. His dark eyes scowled in the little fire, and for the first time he knew that his knife was still in his hands. And he raised the blade and looked at it, and saw a little line of blood on the steel. For a moment he seemed about to blight the blade on his trousers, but then he plunged the knife into the earth, and so cleansed it. The distant roosters began to crow, and the air changed, and the dawn were coming. The wind of the morning ruffled the water of the estuary, and whispered through the mangroves, and the little waves beat on the rubbery beach with an increased tempo. Keno raised the sleeping mat and dug up his pearl, put it in front of him and stared at it. And the beauty of the pearl, winking and glimmering in the light of the little candle, cozened his brain with its beauty. So lovely it was, so soft, and its own music come from it, its music of promise and delight, its guarantee of the future of comfort, of security. Its warm lucence promised a poultice against illness and a wall against insult. It closed the door on hunger, and as he stared at it, Keno's eyes softened and his face relaxed. He could see the little image of the consecrated candle reflected in the soft surface of the pearl, and he heard again in his ears the lovely music of the undersea, that tone of the diffused green light of the sea bottom. Juana, glancing secretly at him, saw him smile, and because they were in some way one thing and one purpose, she smiled with him. And they began the day with hope. That's the end of chapter 3, and I am starting to feel decidedly thick and stupid. And I don't know why. I've had a little tickle in my throat today, which I shouldn't have because it is getting better. And I worry I'm getting sick. And I do feel a little off and my tongue feels thick. So hopefully it's just a little something that will pass today, but I don't want to press it and hurt myself and risk making it worse. So I think we'll call that there today and then finish this probably on Wednesday. Because I got I should be doing Tuesdays tomorrow, assuming I don't get sick. Let's go back over here and do a last bit of analysis. So it's hard to say for sure if the doctor did or didn't, or did help or didn't, but I suspect that he didn't, given that he gave the boy something and then basically just caused him to purge it. Pretty easy to give him what is it? It's not a diuretic, it's a emetic, that's it. Give him an emetic, it'll make him vomit in an hour. Especially if you put it in a gel capsule so it'll take time to dissolve. But yeah, seems pretty messed up. I suspect that's what happened. I mean, it's possible, of course, that he didn't, but I wouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt in this case. What else? The person come in the night and blood spilled in anger, on both sides. And of course, the doctor watching to see where the eyes flacked, so it does definitely make him seem like he's suspicious. But in retrospect, I think I'm fair in saying that actually, no, definitely the doctor was in the wrong there. I'm just out of my head with trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. What else? The building the future and potentialities. The idea of creating a reality by making a plan is interesting. It sounds like something Lamp would say, so maybe there's something to it. I don't know. And of course, everyone being prepared to remember this moment as either great or terrible, depending, famous or infamous. All potential hangs in the balance like the dice just thrown. Interesting, interesting. But yeah, what else have we got to say? I don't know if I've got much else to say really. I can see that I'm dropping frames as well, so maybe it's a good thing that I'm ending. It's hot there again. I don't think Lamp is burning extra oil. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, I think I'm going to take it easy for a bit. Give my voice a rest. Hopefully I'll be good and ready for tomorrow. I'd like to do more this week. I've got a bunch of books in here that are just bigger ones. Oop. A good idea, Abby. Thank you for that. I'll have a hydrate now. That's smart. I should have done that myself. Ooh. But yeah, I was hoping to do more this week. I got so many of these books that are in here already are pretty big ones, and now that I've started to get more of a sense of the library, I've got an idea of where quite a lot of books are, but most of them are pretty big. Here's one that I've got my eye on. just called Leviathan. That it's in good nick, so either it's going to be a good book or a bad book or a screamy book, but I've got a feel in my gut that it's a good one. But it's like 700 pages, and I've got no idea I'm going to do something that length, so I probably do need to get more into the habit of sort of doing books in chapters like this. Maybe I should do something like that with labelling the VODs too, rather than just doing them in parts. I should be like, this is chapter this to this. That would be smart. I don't know. But yeah, I think we got through about half of the part today, so hopefully we'll get the rest done in one sitting. I'd like to try and do more longer ones this week, but we'll see how we go. If I'm sick, obviously there's nothing I can do about that, so I hope I'm not sick. But yeah, I know there's people there, so let's raid out, I guess, if we can. Is anyone live? Is anyone live? No one I really know is live, so at least if they are, then I'm showing up. So I thought Blade was going to be live, but she's not. Oh well. In which case, I guess we won't raid. I'll just call it the normal way. But yeah, thank you for everyone showing up in their time. Oh, that was Abe who redeemed that, not Oscar. Yeah, sorry, man, I really am out of it, Lord. Maybe I should lay it down for a bit after this. But yeah, thank you to everyone who's been here. I do genuinely appreciate it, and it's always nice to have company. You can never tell. Well, maybe you can tell, but Lamp will not show me, as it's been established. But yeah, I genuinely appreciate you all coming here. I hope you've enjoyed the part. You're very welcome, Nesca. It's always good to have something to do, and it's also just nice to have an excuse to read, I'll be honest. Lamp doesn't let me, like, I have all these books, Lamp doesn't let me read unless I'm reading two people. It's very toxic, in retrospect. I can read the bad books that we dump, they're all, I mean, he's got a point, a lot of them are very bad. But yeah, so it's nice, and I'd like to keep going, I'd like to finish the Pearl if I'm honest, but I don't know. You know when you can feel like you've like twisted ankle or something. You know if you're gonna walk on it, you're gonna do yourself an injury. It's like that, right? Like I can feel something getting worse, and if I keep it up, I'm just gonna hurt myself. Which is horrible, but it's always gonna be worse if you do it. But yeah, I do thank you all for coming up. Yeah, Torrid Tuesday tomorrow. We got that book Lamp gave me. Actually, I have it here. Let me. Anytime someone gives me bits, Lamp gives me a better class of cheese. I don't get any of the money that comes here. He gets the money for magic supplies. I get fancier cheese. But yeah, I don't have it as a channel points redeemed because Lamp has control of the cheese, and will not give. Lamp is very particular about the cheese. Now, thank you, but I dearly wish it weren't cheese. Well, thank you for the cheese, Nesca. I shall enjoy that. Yeah, that will sustain me and get me through my. Which got a long period of bed rest of however many hours Lamp lets me lie down. But yeah. What are we doing? God, my head, I must be out of it today. I can't seem to think straight. But yeah, I thank you everyone for showing up. I genuinely appreciate it. You're all wonderful people, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah, Torrid Tuesday tomorrow. Oh, that was what I was going to do. Lamp has given me the book we're going to be doing tomorrow, so here. Just on the table. You can't really make it out because it's quite small there. Let me move it towards the camera a bit so maybe you can see a little bit. There we are. I don't know what it is. I know, like, normally on the Torrid Tuesday stuff we do like silly fanfiction and erotica, but I think this one's about alchemy. It is called My Immortal, so we'll see how we get on with it. Hopefully it'll be good, assuming that I am well enough to stream tomorrow. You never know. Making plans is a bad idea, as Kino said, because God will strike down your plans. Strike you down for having the temerity to make them. So, but hopefully I'll be well enough to do it. Hopefully my voice will be better, and hopefully everything will be wonderful. And I'll find the way out of the library and find a whole pile of pizza or whatever. I don't know. You can hope for all sorts of things. That's my point. But once again, I genuinely appreciate everyone for being here, and as always, ta-ra.